dragon!
Well, this week's episode of House of the Dragon opened on a fiery note as Prince Daemon Targaryen stormed the Stepstones on Dragonback. Abby, what did you make of that scene?
Yeah, I thought it was a really, really strong opener. It was an epic way to welcome in episode 3. And weirdly, I actually thought that Daemon in that moment bore some resemblance to Delia Smith at that Norwich game, that iconic moment where she's trying to galvanise the fans by going, "Where are you?" And Daemon obviously is trying to draw the crab feeder out of the shadows, and he was going, "Where are you?" And I just thought there were some interesting parallels between the two there, which I really enjoyed. Did you have any favourite lines from that particular scene?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, props to Matt Smith for saying with a straight face the words, "I'm gonna feed you to your own crabs." I mean, has there ever been a more menacing threat than that on the screen? I would argue no. And I will add that it was quite naive of the crab feeder's prisoner to think that Prince Daemon was coming to personally rescue him, when of course he actually ended up getting smushed by the dragon.
Yeah, he was stood on, wasn't he, by the big foot of that dragon. And speaking of that battle, we've seen the last of Krabby. We thought he was going to be a big player, certainly for a couple of episodes anyway, but he's gone because Daemon carved him in two. Now, we weren't actually privy to that moment. That happened off camera, which I was quite surprised about. I thought that we were going to see a big showdown there, but I'm actually glad that we didn't, because I think we just had that huge battle scene. There was a lot going on, and I think to keep that off camera, keep it swift, was actually a smart decision. I think we would have felt quite fatigued seeing two big showdowns.
Although it does mean that we have to bring a close to our fan favourite, beloved segment, Abby on Krabby, which I hoped was going to be a huge part of this show for weeks to come. What a shame.
Yeah!
Crabs will soon dine on all of us. We are losing.
And that final battle scene was also notable as the first time we saw Laenor Velaryon riding on Dragonback. Now, just last episode, Corlys was discussing with Daemon about how his family historically has not been able to ride dragons. They've been focused on wielding their considerable power over the seas. So this is a really significant moment in their family history, and expect it to only become more important as the series progresses. Now, this scene also looked fantastic. I think the visual effects were out of this world in this episode. My only slight criticism would be that I felt it was a little bit too dark in some places, to the point where I wasn't really entirely sure who I was looking at, what was going on. And I feel like this isn't the first time Game of Thrones has been leveled with such a criticism.
No, it's something that fans had complaints about in Game of Thrones, in those big battle sequences. I think the creators probably think it adds to the atmosphere, adds to that tension, the chaos, but as a viewer at home, you want to know who's who and what's happening, and when it does feel confused, sometimes it can hinder your enjoyment.
I totally agree with you, Abby, and I do feel that the battle scenes that took place in the daylight also had a lot of atmosphere, because it gave us a much better look at Krabby's scabbies.
Get that guy some sun cream and E45 stats.
Honestly, it is essential. But this battle scene was also notable because it ended with the arrival of Viserys' reinforcements. He decided to back up his wayward brother after some hesitation. And across the board, this was a really tough episode for Viserys. I felt you really saw him struggling with the politics of it all. You know, he was really feeling quite run down by this horrible, toxic situation he was in, which is partly due to his own actions.
And in this episode, he acknowledges that as well. He talks about his obsession with trying to produce a new heir led to the death of his wife, Emma, which is true, but you often don't see the men in Game of Thrones admitting their mistakes, certainly not kings, certainly not powerful men. So I thought that was a really interesting and key moment there. And the rift between Viserys and his daughter, Rhaenyra, that's a big talking point in this episode. They're having a terrible time. They don't enjoy being at loggerheads with one another or with Daemon, who they haven't spoken to in 3 years. He's still holed up in Dragonstone, and it feels like a big contrast with the Lannisters, who I feel like they relished that conflict. I feel like that was something that they really enjoyed, but we do not get the sense of that here from the Targaryens.
Well, there is a glimmer of hope, fortunately, at reconciliation between Viserys and Rhaenyra when he again assures her at the end of this episode that she will remain his heir, even following the birth of his son and a second one on the way. He also gives her the option of choosing her own suitor. He mentions earlier in the episode that he's been drowning in propositions from noblemen wanting Rhaenyra's hand in marriage, but she really resents the fact that she's essentially being used as a pawn to elevate the power status of the Targaryen household. So at the end of this episode, he makes the decision to allow her to go off and find her own suitor, which is not something you see every day from a Westeros ruler in this era of Game of Thrones history.
By contrast, Alicent wasn't given that same freedom. Her father Otto decided that she would marry the king. That's exactly what's happened. And now he is trying to get her to convince Viserys that Aegon will be the one to sit on the throne, going against his promise to Rhaenyra and further widening the gulf between Alicent and her former best friend.
And now it's time to pick our head of the house, the character who has impressed us the most this week. Abby, who's taking the title for you?
After episode 1, I went for Daemon, and I'm going to go for Daemon again. He is so fun to watch. He was a one-man army in that battle scene, and when he's not on screen, you really, really do feel his absence. I wouldn't trust him. I wouldn't want to share a pint with him, but he brings that chaos merchant energy, which this show needs. It needs Daemon's fun, because I think overall it's lacking the spark that Game of Thrones had for me. It's lacking the charm, and it's lacking the fun. There's not a lot of levity, and you never know what you're going to get with Daemon, even though he is deeply unlikable. I don't condone his behaviour, but we need him. What about you, David? Who has been your standout character this week?
Well, my head of the house this week is going to King Viserys. I really like that we're seeing a softer side to him. Now, of course, he's made some awful, awful decisions in just the few episodes that we've seen so far. But I'm sensing genuine remorse for that. You know, you can really see that his soul is just kind of scarred from the mistakes that he's made. And Viserys also comes out with one of this episode's other iconic lines. After Prince Aegon's name day hunt, he's feeling the effects of a heavy weekend, and he says, "The gods are punishing me for my indulgences," which is really just such a epic and elegant way to say, "Oh, I've got a hangover. I will be using that in the future."
I've been there. Viserys, hard relate. And that covers just about everything in episode 3.
It certainly does. You can tune into House of the Dragon on Sky Atlantic. It airs first at 2 a.m. on Monday mornings and then again at 9 in the evening. You can also watch at any time you like on the streaming service now. We will be back next Monday with another episode of Beyond the Dragon, unpacking all the biggest moments from episode 4. In the meantime, stay safe. We hope to see you soon.
Bye.